As Amma, the renowned hunter, sprinted after the giant antelope, her heart raced with both adrenaline and disbelief. She raised her rifle, took aim, and fired a precise shot that should have brought down any beast. The bullet found its mark, sinking into the antelope's flesh, but instead of collapsing, the creature barely flinched. The bullet ricocheted off its skin with a sharp metallic twang, flying back toward the trees. Amma's eyes widened in shock. "What the hell?" she muttered under her breath. "What kind of creature doesn't fall from a shot like that?" Her instinct screamed that something wasn't right. The antelope's eyes gleamed unnaturally, and its legs moved with an otherworldly swiftness, almost as though it was weightless, floating rather than running. Each step it took seemed deliberate, as if it was luring her deeper into a dangerous unknown. And yet, despite every warning bell ringing in her mind, Amma couldn't shake the pull to follow. Something deeper, darker, kept her legs moving, some unseen force that overpowered her judgment. The antelope, relentless and tireless, finally darted into a narrow cave. Without hesitation, Amma followed, her breath shallow and quick. No sooner had she crossed the cave's threshold than the ground beneath her feet trembled. Stones rolled and shifted with eerie precision, sealing the entrance shut behind her. Amma whirled around, heart pounding as the light of the outside world vanished. The walls of the cave seemed to close in, their jagged edges like the teeth of a great beast, trapping her inside. A shiver crawled up her spine, chilling her blood. Her voice, barely more than a whisper, escaped her lips. "So this is a trap, isn't it? That damned antelope, an evil spirit in disguise." The weight of her predicament sank in. Her throat tightened, and for the first time in a long while, fear crept into the edges of her courage. How was she supposed to escape? She had faced wild beasts and dangers before, but nothing like this, a sinister game played by an invisible hand. The panic gnawed at her resolve, but she forced herself to breathe, to stay focused. There had to be a way out. There always was. She started moving through the cave, her steps cautious but determined. The further she ventured, the air grew thicker, heavier, and the faint scent of salt water mixed with damp earth filled her nostrils. That's when she heard it, a low rumble, like the growl of a distant storm. Her pulse quickened. She turned a corner, and there, in the dim light of the cave, her breath caught in her throat. Before her stood a sight she could barely comprehend, a mermaid, nailed to a tree by an arrow. The creature's shimmering scales reflected faint light from unseen sources, and though her eyes were dull with pain, she was undeniably alive. Amma's mind raced. How could a mermaid be here, inside a cave, far from any sea? And the tree, how could it possibly grow in this lifeless stone prison? Amma's voice trembled as she muttered to herself, "What madness is this? Who could be so cruel as to pin a creature like this here? And for how long?" Before she could make sense of it all, the mermaid's weak, raspy voice cut through the silence. "Please, help me. I've been here, for 25 long years. I beg you. I'm dying." Amma stepped back, unsure. Her mind whirled with questions and doubts. "I can't just save you without knowing more. What are you? What did you do to deserve this? Who did this to you?" The mermaid's eyes flickered with both desperation and disappointment. She had hoped for salvation the moment she saw Amma, but instead, she was met with suspicion. Time was running out, she could feel the life slipping from her body. But she knew she had to explain, to earn this stranger's trust. In a distant village, tucked near the edge of a vast and mysterious sea, lived a man named Okoro. The sea was notorious for being a gateway to the unknown, often whispered about in the village for its otherworldly visitors, creatures that walked among men disguised as humans. Despite the air of mystery that surrounded the village, life for Okoro was tragically simple. At 30 years old, he was poor, but not for lack of effort. Every sunrise found him working tirelessly, whether with the fishermen, hauling in nets heavy with the ocean's gifts, or in the fields, breaking the earth beneath his calloused hands. Yet, no matter how hard he labored, his earnings were meager, barely enough to keep him fed, let alone build a life. His life seemed to be cursed, a puzzle no one could solve. He was mocked in silence, the village women turning their noses up at him, unwilling to marry a man with nothing to offer but hard work and empty pockets. The men, too, sneered behind his back, their laughter sharp and cruel as they ridiculed his threadbare clothes and hopeless ambitions. Okoro felt the weight of their judgments every day, their whispers carried to him on the wind like the stinging bite of sand. With no wife and no family, Okoro often sought solace by the sea. It was there, on the weathered rocks by the shore, that he would sit and lose himself in thought, staring out at the endless horizon. The rhythmic crash of the waves seemed to mirror the rise and fall of his own life, ceaseless, yet ultimately fruitless. He would sit for hours, watching the sun dip below the waves, admiring the fierce beauty of nature while silently battling the sorrow that gnawed at his heart. One evening, as the golden light of the setting sun bathed the sea in fire, Okoro sat alone on his usual rock, lost in thought. His heart felt heavier than usual, burdened by the loneliness that seemed to deepen with each passing day. Suddenly, a soft tap on his shoulder pulled him from his reverie. Startled, he turned to find himself face to face with a woman he had never seen before. Her beauty was striking, her eyes deep and knowing, her skin glowing softly in the fading light. She looked to be no older than 26, yet there was something about her presence that felt ancient, as if she carried the weight of lifetimes. "Who are you?" Okoro asked, his voice hesitant, surprised by the intrusion. "I am a stranger here," the woman replied, her voice smooth like the breeze that danced off the sea. "My name is Adora. I've recently come to this village from a place far away. I have no friends, no family, and no work. I thought perhaps we could help each other. I hear you are a man who works hard, and I, too, am looking for a way to earn a living." Okoro, whose life was governed by simplicity and a kind heart, did not press her for details. It wasn't in his nature to question someone who needed help. His gaze softened, and without hesitation, he nodded. "No problem. We can work together. We'll share what we earn." In the back of his mind, Okoro couldn't help but wonder why a woman of such beauty and grace would choose to approach him of all people. But he pushed the thought aside, reasoning that life was unpredictable and often threw strangers together by chance. Generosity had always been his way, even though it never seemed to reward him. The thought lingered in his mind, they say money is the root of all evil, but when it comes, it reveals the true heart of a person. Perhaps, this was just another twist of fate he had yet to understand. The following morning, as the first light of dawn bathed the village, a soft knock echoed through the wooden door of Okoro's small hut. It was Adora. She stood there, a calm yet determined expression on her face, ready to work. Together, they made their way to the chief's vast farmland, where they toiled under the blazing sun, their hands moving in unison as they cleared the fields and harvested crops. But something strange happened that day. When it came time for payment, the chief handed Okoro a sum far greater than what he had ever earned before. His calloused fingers hesitated over the coins, his mind reeling. Double the usual pay, he thought. He almost questioned it but chose to brush it off, chalking it up to good fortune. After all, he needed the money. Without dwelling too long on his surprise, Okoro handed Adora her share, and they parted ways. Yet, the next job they worked together brought the same inexplicable reward, more money than he'd ever received for the same labor. Day after day, week after week, this pattern repeated itself, and soon, Okoro found himself with enough savings to buy something he had only dreamed of, a boat of his own, sturdy and strong, fit for the sea he so often gazed at longingly. The change in his fortunes did not go unnoticed by the villagers. People who had once mocked his ragged clothes and worn face now whispered with envy, wondering how the poor man's life had turned around so quickly. But Okoro wasn't blind. He knew something was off. Since the moment Adora had come into his life, it was as if luck itself had decided to shower him with abundance. He could feel it in his bones. There was more to this woman than met the eye. She had brought prosperity with her, a kind that defied logic. And so, Okoro vowed never to let her leave his side. Whatever mystery she carried, he would hold on to it, and her, for as long as he could. With his new boat, Okoro threw himself into the fishing business he had always dreamed of. The sea had long called to him, its waters full of promise, and now he had the means to answer that call. However, when he excitedly told Adora of his plan, her face grew pale. "I can't," she murmured. "I don't like water, and I'm afraid of the sea." Her words left Okoro bewildered. How could anyone fear the sea, the very source of life for their village? He pressed her, begging her to join him. "Please, don't leave me now," he pleaded, his voice cracking with desperation. He couldn't imagine going forward without her. Her presence had brought him more than just wealth, it had brought him hope. Tears welled in Adora's eyes, but she relented, agreeing to stay by his side, though there was an unspoken tension between them. On their first fishing trip together, the sea blessed them with an extraordinary catch. The nets were heavy with fish, far more than any fisherman had ever hauled in before. Word spread quickly throughout the village, and Okoro's reputation as a skilled fisherman began to rise. He was no longer the poor man they had once pitied, he was now a force to be reckoned with, a man whose success seemed destined. But it was during one fateful trip that the veil of secrecy began to lift. As they worked the waters, casting their nets and pulling in fish, Adora slipped. She tumbled over the edge of the boat, her body crashing into the cold, deep sea. Without thinking, Okoro leaped after her, diving into the water to save her. He reached her quickly, his strong arms wrapping around her waist as he pulled her back onto the boat. But when they both surfaced, what he saw sent a shock through his entire being. There, before him, Adora had transformed. Her legs were gone, replaced by a long, shimmering tail. Her body glistened with scales, radiant in the sunlight. Okoro's breath caught in his throat. "Are you a mermaid?" he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper, the weight of his disbelief nearly crushing him. Before he could fully grasp the situation, Adora's form shifted back to that of a woman. Her human skin returned, the tail vanished as though it had never existed. She stood before him, dripping wet, her face a mixture of fear and resignation. "Yes," she finally admitted, her voice heavy. "I am a mermaid. I escaped the sea to live among humans. I thought I could leave that world behind." Stunned, Okoro took a step back. His mind raced with questions, but only one spilled from his lips. "Now that I know who you are you going to leave me?" Adora shook her head gently, her gaze softening. "No, Okoro. I'm not going anywhere. My time with you is unlimited." From that day forward, their bond grew deeper. Okoro, now aware of Adora's true nature, became even more careful around her. He treated her with reverence, knowing she was not ordinary. Together, they continued their business, and over the years, Okoro's wealth grew beyond what he could have ever imagined. The man who had once been scorned by the village was now one of its richest, his fortunes rising with each haul from the sea. Yet, behind his newfound wealth, Okoro could not shake the feeling that something still lingered in the shadows of his success. Adora's presence was a blessing, yes, but there was an unspoken test looming in the distance, a test he didn't even know he would have to face. However, with great wealth comes burdens, and Okoro had been too blinded by his newfound success to realize the weight he now carried. Adora, though silent, was never truly idle. She was an ancient being, one who had seen the rise and fall of many over the course of centuries. For every person she helped to wealth, there was always a test that revealed their true nature once the riches were in their hands. Okoro's test was approaching, though he remained unaware of the storm gathering on the horizon. Okoro had seemingly found everything he had once dreamed of. After years of being shunned and ridiculed, he had finally settled down. He married a woman from the village, and together they had a daughter, Amma. She was 3 years old, a bright-eyed child filled with curiosity, her small footsteps often echoing through their home as she explored her surroundings. Okoro loved her fiercely, and life was kind to him. The once poor man, mocked by all, was now a respected figure in the village, providing well for his family and enjoying the fruits of his labor. All of this, of course, had come from the secret bond he shared with Adora. But Adora was ever watchful. She knew that Okoro had not yet faced the ultimate trial. For all the kindness and humility he had shown in his days of poverty, true character was only revealed when tested by misfortune. And Adora was patient. The time for Okoro's test would come soon. One season, without any warning, the skies grew dark and heavy. What had begun as a calm day quickly spiraled into chaos. Black clouds swirled above the village, blotting out the sun. The winds howled, and the once tranquil sea churned violently. Waves, tall and monstrous, slammed against the shore, and storms tore through the village with an unrelenting fury. Okoro's fishing boats, his prized possessions, the foundation of his wealth, were ripped apart by the relentless storms. His men, unable to fight against the wrath of nature, returned with grim news. The sea, once bountiful and generous, had turned against them. Where there had once been an abundance of fish, there was now only emptiness. As if under some unseen curse, the sea had suddenly gone silent, offering nothing to those who dared cast their nets into its waters. At first, Okoro remained calm. He had seen setbacks before. He reassured his workers, urging them to wait out the storm. Once the skies clear, we will rebuild, he told them, confident that the sea would return to normal. But the storm lasted for days, then weeks, the wind and waves showing no signs of stopping. Eventually, the skies did calm, but the sea remained barren. Undeterred, Okoro built new boats, each more costly than the last. He was determined to reclaim his fortune, to rise again as the man he had become. But with each boat that ventured out to sea, disaster followed. Time after time, his vessels would sink, swallowed by the very waters that had once lifted him to prosperity. Each failure drove Okoro deeper into despair. The loss was staggering. His fortune, which had once seemed endless, was being drained before his eyes. The whispers began to spread through the village. Those who had once praised Okoro now spoke of his misfortune in hushed tones. His luck has run out, some said. The sea spirits are angry, others whispered. The tides of fortune had turned, and the village, once full of admiration, now watched him with a mixture of pity and suspicion. As the weeks passed and his fortune dwindled further, Okoro grew desperate. The workers he had employed, once loyal and steadfast, began to leave him, seeking employment elsewhere. He could no longer afford to pay them, and with no fish to catch, they saw no future with him. Frustration gnawed at his heart. The man who had once been so generous was now consumed with bitterness. In his desperation, Okoro turned to those he had helped in the past, the very people he had once lifted out of poverty by building them homes and boats. He went from house to house, demanding they return what he had given them. The gratitude they had once shown turned to sorrow and anger, as Okoro stripped away the very things he had once gifted them in kindness. Where once he had been a savior, now he was seen as cruel, leaving behind a trail of resentment. Despite all of this, the curse of poverty clung to him like a shadow. No matter how much he took back, no matter how many boats he built, Okoro could not escape the growing void that was swallowing his wealth. The fish remained gone, the sea cruel and silent. And with each passing day, the man who had once been lifted by fortune was dragged deeper into despair, his riches slipping through his fingers like water. Unbeknownst to him, The test was in full motion. The storm, the vanishing fish, the losses, these were not accidents. Adora, the silent watcher, had set the wheels in motion, waiting to see how Okoro would respond when everything he had gained was taken from him. And as Okoro's bitterness grew, his true nature was slowly being revealed. The man who had once been humble, kind, and giving was now showing the darkness that lurked beneath when faced with hardship. One evening, with the weight of his misfortunes pressing heavily on his shoulders, Okoro stood at the edge of the sea, his silhouette framed by the dim light of the fading sun. The vast expanse of water before him no longer felt like a source of life, it had become a relentless adversary, a cruel reflection of his ruined fate. His fists clenched tightly at his sides, his knuckles white from the strain, as he muttered bitter curses under his breath. The wind whipped around him, carrying his words into the night, but nothing could soothe the growing storm within his heart. His face, once open and calm, was now twisted with bitterness. The kindness that had defined him was buried beneath layers of anger and despair. "Why?" he hissed through gritted teeth, his eyes scanning the endless horizon as if demanding an answer from the very sea that had betrayed him. "Why has this happened to me? Why now, after everything I've built?" His voice grew louder, his frustration spilling over. "Is this how I am repaid? After all my hard work, all my sacrifices?" In the quiet of the time, a figure emerged from the shadows behind him. Adora stood silently at first, her eyes observing the man she had once helped with compassion now tinged with sorrow. She had always known this moment would come, the test she had set in motion now revealing Okoro's true nature. But she had not expected the depths of his rage, the way his spirit had crumbled under the weight of his loss. Okoro, oblivious to her presence, continued his tirade, his words growing more desperate. "I gave everything for this. I worked so hard. And now, it's all being taken away from me." His voice cracked with the weight of his anger and hopelessness. Finally, Adora spoke, her voice soft but laced with disappointment. "Is this the man you've become, Okoro?" He froze, the sound of her voice slicing through the air like a blade. Slowly, he turned, his eyes locking onto Adora's figure. He had forgotten that she was a part of his life, a silent witness to his rise and now his fall. His face softened for a brief moment, but the anger quickly surged back, harder and sharper. "You were once patient, kind, and humble," Adora continued, her tone calm but firm. "But now, faced with misfortune, you've let anger consume you. You even took back the kindness you once gave to others, just to rebuild your wealth. Have you forgotten what it means to be generous, to be the man you once were?" Okoro's chest heaved with fury. He could barely contain the venom in his voice. "I've lost everything, Adora. Everything." His hands trembled as he pointed toward the sea. "The storms destroyed my boats, and the fish are gone. What am I supposed to do? Just sit here and watch as my life crumbles around me?" Adora's eyes, filled with the wisdom of her ancient existence, met his gaze. "The sea has tested many before you, Okoro. It gives, and it takes away. But the true test is not the loss, it is how you respond to it. Will you be patient and find another way? Or will you let this anger blind you to the path ahead?" Her words only fueled the fire burning inside him. Okoro's face contorted in rage. "Test? What test? You've given me nothing but a curse." His voice grew louder, harsher. "All these years, I worked tirelessly. I earned everything I have. And now you want to test me with loss? How can you be so wicked? After everything, you bring this meaningless test into my life." Adora stood still, her face expressionless but her eyes betraying the centuries of trials she had witnessed. "I am a mermaid, Okoro," she said, her voice steady. "I have lived for thousands of years, helping humans achieve fortune and wealth. But wealth is not the true measure of a person's character. That is why I test those I help. You, Okoro, have failed this test." Her words hung in the air, heavy with finality. Okoro's face darkened, his jaw clenched in anger. "You," he spat, "are the reason for all of this. You brought the storms, the misfortune, the ruin of my life. And now you expect me to accept it as some sort of lesson? I have a family, Adora. You've taken everything from me. You're no savior, you're a curse." Adora's expression softened for a moment, her voice a whisper of regret. "This is how I test those I help. And in your case, you have failed, Okoro. You will remain poor for the rest of your life." At her words, something inside Okoro snapped. His hands shot out, and before he could stop himself, he grabbed Adora by the neck, his fingers tightening around her throat. Her eyes widened in shock as the air was forced from her lungs, her strength weakening under his grasp. She was immortal, yes, but even she could feel the pain of his fury. "How dare you?" Okoro growled, his voice low and venomous. "You want to ruin my life and then walk away? You will not leave me like this." Adora's vision blurred as she struggled for breath, her consciousness fading. Okoro knew she wouldn't die, not in the water, but he had another plan. With an unnatural calmness, he dragged her limp body to a nearby cave, muttering ancient incantations he had learned from local shamans. The air inside the cave grew thick with a dark energy, swirling around them as Okoro placed her body against a tree that appeared out of the shadows. With a swift movement, he raised a charm-laced arrow and shot it into her chest. The arrow buried itself deep into her side, and Adora, in her weakened state, could not stop him. Her body slumped against the tree, her mermaid form emerging briefly before fading. She was now trapped, nailed to the tree, caught between her human form and the curse of the sea. "This," Okoro hissed, his voice filled with venom, "is my revenge for everything you've taken from me. You will find no peace here. No one will save you. Only I, or my blood, can free you. But you will rot here first." As he turned to leave, Adora's eyes fluttered open, pain rippling through her as the charmed arrow pulsed with dark magic. She watched him walk away, powerless to stop him. Slowly, her body shifted into her mermaid form, her scales dull and her strength fading. She would live for a century in this form, but only just if no one came to save her. The pain would eventually claim her life. Okoro left the cave without looking back, his soul darkened by the curse he had unleashed. Okoro's life had now crumbled to dust, much like the fortune he had once held. The mysterious death of his wife, 5 years after his downfall, only deepened the shadows that loomed over his existence. He never spoke it aloud, but in the still moments of the night, guilt gnawed at him like a persistent hunger. He believed her death was tied to the curse he had set in motion when he nailed Adora to that tree. Her spirit lingered in his mind, a silent ghost haunting his every thought. With his wife gone, Okoro gathered his young daughter, Amma, and left the village that had once been his kingdom. He sought refuge in another village, but his hard work never bore fruit again. No matter how much he toiled, wealth eluded him, as if fate had turned its back on him permanently. Yet, Okoro was determined to pass on one lesson to Amma, a lesson forged from his bitterness and regrets. He would tell her, time and time again, "Amma, don't rely on anyone in this world. People are wicked. Build your wealth with your own hands. Never hope in others, and no matter what life throws at you, never lose hope in yourself." His words were like iron, spoken with the kind of conviction that only comes from years of defeat. But there was one thing Okoro never told his daughter. He never spoke of Adora, the mermaid, or the terrible sin he had committed. He carried that secret to his grave. 15 years passed, and when Okoro too finally died, Amma was left devastated, her heart heavy with sorrow. "Why do my parents die so young?" she wept. It seemed as though death had followed her family like a dark cloud. Though she knew nothing of the curse her father had set into motion, A gnawing feeling tugged at her soul. Perhaps there was something more, some hidden curse connected to the village of her birth. Determined to escape whatever fate haunted her family, Amma left her father's village behind, unknowingly returning to the very village where Okoro had committed his deadly sin. As soon as Amma set foot in the village, she was taken by the royal guards. Bewildered and frightened, she was brought before the oracle master, an ancient figure who had been waiting for this moment for years. "You are a stranger," the oracle said, his voice grave, "and you will be the one to carry the sacrifice offering to the nearby forest to cleanse the land and bring good fortune once again. It must be a stranger who performs this sacred task, and we have waited long for a stranger's arrival." Amma's heart raced. She had never heard of such a tradition. "What sacrifice?" she asked, her voice trembling. The oracle's eyes narrowed. "You must catch an antelope in the forest, and you have 3 days to do so. If you fail, you will die. This tradition is the result of a curse that haunts our village. It cannot be broken." Amma had no choice. She was trapped by a fate she didn't understand, bound to a ritual she had no way to escape. Over the course of a month, Amma was trained to be a hunter, her bravery growing with each passing day. The villagers began to regard her with respect, whispering that she might be the savior they had long waited for. Even the royal family watched her progress closely, hoping she would succeed where others had failed. The day of the sacrifice finally arrived. The village fell into eerie silence, with all the villagers hiding in their homes. Only Amma and the oracle master walked the empty streets. When they reached the edge of the forest, the oracle stopped, his voice low. "This is as far as I go. From here, you are on your own. May the gods be with you." Amma took a deep breath and stepped into the forest, the weight of the task pressing on her like a heavy stone. She placed the sacrifice offering at the designated spot, then waited, scanning the dense trees for any sign of the elusive antelope. Hours passed, and just as her hope began to wane, an antelope darted past her, its movements swift and almost unnatural. Without hesitation, Amma gave chase, her heart pounding in her chest. The hunt led her deeper into the forest until she stumbled upon a hidden cave, a place where light barely touched. She hesitated at the entrance, something ancient and foreboding in the air, but her determination pushed her forward. Inside the cave, Amma's breath caught in her throat. There, nailed to a tree, was a creature unlike any she had ever seen, a mermaid, her shimmering form dulled by years of pain, her face etched with suffering. For 25 long years, Adora had been trapped there, her life hanging by a thread. She recognized Amma instantly, the blood of Okoro running strong in the young woman's veins. But she said nothing of the past. Adora had learned patience in her long imprisonment. She knew that telling Amma the truth too soon would risk her chance at freedom. "Please," Adora's voice was weak, barely more than a whisper. "Help me. I am about to die. I've been here for so long." Amma, though brave, was filled with fear and doubt. This was no ordinary creature, this was something tied to the mysteries of the land, something dangerous. "I can't save you," Amma said, her voice trembling. "Not yet. My life depends on finding an antelope first. If I don't, I'll die." Adora's eyes flashed with desperation. "Finding an antelope here is nearly impossible. But I can help you. I promise, if you free me, I will guide you to the antelope. You must trust me." Amma stood frozen, her mind racing. Could she trust this strange creature? After long moments of hesitation, she made her decision. "All right," she whispered, her voice resolute. "I'll save you." With trembling hands, Amma freed Adora from the tree, pulling the charmed arrow from her side. As soon as the arrow left her body, Adora let out a sigh of relief, her strength returning. She stood tall, her mermaid form shimmering faintly in the dim light. "I will fulfill my promise," Adora said, her voice steady now, "but there is something else I must do." Her words sent a chill through Amma. "What do you mean?" Amma asked, suspicion creeping into her voice. Adora didn't reply. She simply stepped out of the cave, and as soon as she did, the antelope that had led Amma to the cave appeared. "There," Adora said, pointing. "Kill it, and your life will be spared." Amma, not fully trusting the mermaid but desperate to survive, did as she was told. She killed the antelope, completing the sacrificial ritual. But as they returned to the village, a sense of unease grew within Amma. Back at the palace, the villagers gathered, anxious to see if the ritual had been successful. Adora, now free, climbed onto a platform and addressed the entire village. Her voice rang out, filled with the weight of her suffering. "For 25 years, I have been bound to a tree, nailed by the hand of Okoro, this young woman's father. I was a mermaid, and I helped him become rich. But when I tested him, he failed and cursed me to a life of pain." The villagers gasped in shock as Adora pointed to Amma. "This girl is the blood of Okoro, the man who condemned me. I have waited long for this day, waited for my revenge." Before Amma could react, Adora's eyes gleamed with cold fury. In an instant, she struck Amma down, her life snuffed out as the villagers watched in horror. Adora's voice trembled with pain and rage as she spoke her final words. "For the suffering I endured, I take my revenge." Then, in a final act of defiance, Adora took her own immortal life, collapsing to the ground as her body faded into the sea mist. The villagers stood frozen, the weight of the tragedy sinking into their hearts. The tale of Okoro, Amma, and Adora endures as a haunting cautionary tale passed down through generations. It is a stark reminder of the destructive power of greed, betrayal, and the weight of curses that are not easily shaken. In its essence, the story serves as a moral lesson, warning against the dangers of overreaching for wealth without understanding its true cost. Okoro's rise from poverty to wealth, facilitated by Adora, is a story familiar to many, one of ambition and the desire to escape hardship. Yet, as the tale reveals, the path to fortune is never without its trials. Okoro's partnership with Adora, a mermaid, comes with hidden strings attached. Her ancient wisdom teaches that wealth alone is not a sign of worth, and true character is tested in moments of loss. Okoro, once humble, falls prey to the arrogance and greed that often accompany sudden prosperity. When faced with adversity, instead of remaining patient and grounded, he lashes out in anger and cruelty. His inability to accept the natural ebb and flow of life's fortunes leads him to commit the unforgivable act of nailing Adora to a tree, trapping her in eternal pain. Adora, a being of immense power and wisdom, is bound not only by the curse but also by the need for justice. The test she imposed on Okoro was not just about wealth, it was a measure of his soul. In his failure, the curse that follows him extends beyond his own life, affecting his family and future generations. His daughter, Amma, unknowingly returns to the village where her father's sin was committed, only to face the ultimate price of her father's misdeeds. The tale's conclusion, where Adora takes her revenge on both Okoro and Amma, is a chilling testament to the consequences of betrayal and unheeded warnings. Adora's decision to end her own immortal life after exacting revenge reflects the deep pain inflicted upon her, a pain that could only be resolved by bringing justice to those who wronged her. Passed down through the generations, the story serves as a warning that curses, once unleashed, are difficult to break. It reminds people to tread carefully in their pursuit of wealth and power, and to remember that every action has consequences. Please subscribe to African Folktale Spot for more amazing story like this one. See you soon.